Welcome to the Talking, Learning and Teaching podcast. In this episode, we're talking about encouraging student use of AI in research methods modules with Dr. Tadhg Blommerde. Tadhg is an assistant professor at Northumbria University. He completed his PhD in Ireland before coming to the UK, where he completed a postdoc at the University of Sheffield on the adoption of sophisticated emerging technologies like generative AI in the legal sector, whilst teaching at Oxford Brookes University. Tadhg is interested in teaching students the effective, critical, ethical, and responsible use of generative AI as it relates to their studies and future careers. He has approached his AI work with students through active and experiential learning, utilizing students as partners where they have contributed to curriculum design, specifying what they wanted to learn. So, Tadhg, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
The honor is mine, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. So, for context, you've got a research methods module that openly teaches students how to use AI effectively, ethically, critically, and responsibly, and quite impressively with 0 cases of academic misconduct. Can you briefly explain the innovative approach you took in encouraging your students to use generative AI for their final assessment in the research methods module?
Yes, absolutely. When my module ran in the academic year 2022-2023, students didn't really like the module. It scored very poorly in the end of module survey. A lot of students were questioning, what is the point of this module? The point was to help them with their final year project, be it dissertation or management inquiry, a research-led project. But students didn't really see the value in that. So with the advent of generative AI and ChatGPT in November, December 2022, I thought, well, it would be really great to redesign this module to teach students how to use it effectively. The previous year, students had been using GenAI to, I'd say, write most of their assignment for my module. It was very obvious. And I was thinking, it's such a shame to see a poor standard of cheating when they have access to such a powerful tool. And I came to the conclusion that their use of GenAI was so poor because they were doing it in secret. They were concealing their use of it. There was a stigma attached. There was a lot of discouragement in the university from using GenAI. And I thought, let's bring it into the open. Let's let the students use it as much as possible and understand the capabilities and the limitations of this technology. So you mentioned that I have a 0 academic misconduct for using GenAI only. Academic misconduct does exist, but not for using GenAI. If you can put together a final assessment for my module that you didn't write any of it yourself and it passes for human work, well, congratulations, you've done a great job with the module. There's a misconception going around that students can easily cheat any module by just using GenAI. And it's not that easy. I ask the listeners to your podcast, Kevin, how many have actually tried to cheat their own assignment using GenAI? It's very hard. You need a high quality prompt to get the sort of output that you want. It's going to address the learning objectives for that module. And well, the output might not be very good. You might require extensive revision and correction and personalization. So by bringing GenAI use into the open and teaching students about how to use it well, first of all, but also very critically, looking carefully at the output that GenAI creates and thinking about the implications of this technology for the rest of their studies and their future careers was, well, I'd say appreciated by students. The module feedback went from being, I'm going to say, one of the worst in the department to scoring better than departmental, faculty, and university averages for 8 out of 10 questions, also with a much higher response rate than the previous year as well. So I was glad to see that. I had a feeling it was coming from the very favorable and positive feedback I was getting from students throughout the module. So I was delighted that it was such a success.
I mean, I suppose, if students were ever going to cheat on a module or use generative AI to help them, it would be in research methods, wouldn't it? I mean, if I take myself back to my own undergraduate studies, it was one of the driest probably least engaging topics to learn and to teach. I mean, I've taught research methods myself, for many, many years, which it's kind of interesting, isn't it, to sort of listen to the experiences that you've had in teaching that module and the academic misconduct cases that were there prior to sort of bringing Gen AI out into the open. I mean, how did your students initially react to the idea of openly using Gen AI for their assessments? I mean, were there any reservations or were they excited about that?
Good question. The way that I structured the module is that students used different Gen AI tools in the seminars. So for that, they were expected to bring along their personal computer. And I had a curated list of 13 different chatbots that they could use for different purposes throughout the course of the module. We started using Gen AI in the seminars in week 4. And before we got going with the session, we had a bit of a conversation about Gen AI. Now, because I'm so youthful, the students really opened up to me and gave me a lot of honest answers about how they had used Gen AI previously. So students told me about cheating modules and getting away with it. And they also spoke about cheating modules and being caught for cheating, getting an academic misconduct, or failing completely and having to repeat the module itself. So one of the students said, I used Gen AI for one of my assignments last year. I failed and had to repeat it. I said, I thought your face was familiar because it was my module. But I didn't fail them for use of Gen AI. I just failed them for a very poor submission. Over the course of the 12 weeks of the module, we used Gen AI for different purposes. So going back to the first session in week 4, students couldn't believe it. Using Gen AI in class, using ChatGPT in a session, and getting some instruction on writing very high quality prompts, and then critically evaluating the output. The module prompt writing and evaluation part was organized according to Fitzpatrick et al.'s book, Gen AI Classroom, and we used it throughout the whole module. So week 4, we used it for problem solving, and it built on the lecture of that week. So I had some sort of research problem that students were asked to choose a suitable paradigm to investigate. I'm using mainly Collis and Hussey for the module. They call research philosophy paradigm there. It's very simple. There are 2 extremes, interpretivism and positivism, and right in the middle, pragmatism, where you're ignoring research philosophy. So students had to choose which would be more appropriate, a positivist or an interpretivist approach to a research problem. But instead of using their brains, they had to get the Gen AI to make a recommendation. Should they use positivism or interpretivism for this research scenario? And well, I let students off the hook, first of all. I said, you get the Gen AI to make a recommendation. And from 3 seminar groups, 66 students in total, studying international business management and business and entrepreneurship, none could get a recommendation for a discrete paradigm for this. This was a result, I would say, of their very poor prompt writing skills or prompt engineering skills. And it was then that I introduced the Fitzpatrick et al. Prompt engineer framework, which consists of 2 parts. The prep part is about writing effective prompts, and the edit part is about evaluating Gen AI output and changes that you could make to it to improve the quality of that output. After I introduced the prompt engineer framework, students said, hey, we're getting recommendations for a paradigm to use for this. Beforehand, the Gen AI wouldn't get off the fence. It was mixed methods or something like that, and they couldn't get a recommendation for one or the other. When we introduced the prompt engineer framework, I had better and more detailed instructions to the Gen AI. Because Gen AI just hates ambiguity. It wants to be told exactly what to do. So students included things like, do not choose mixed methods. Do not choose pragmatism. You must choose either this or that. In the subsequent weeks, we focused more on other parts of the prompt engineer framework. So in week 5, building on the lecture, we used GenAI to write a literature review and then evaluated the output of the literature review. A lot of students commented, no engagement with any of the sources cited. It doesn't really say how the studies compare or contrast with one another. Completely fabricated citations was another big problem. Students looked at the reference list that the GenAI gave them and they said, this just doesn't exist. This is a made-up study. The authors are real, but they never wrote this. And the title doesn't match up. The year is wrong. This is not credible. So I really got them to think critically about engagement meaningfully with academic studies that the GenAI included in the literature review. In week 6, they used GenAI to write a research proposal. And the only rule was that they couldn't use my prompt from the final assessment for the module. They had to get the GenAI to write a research proposal themselves. I kind of wanted to show them how hard it was to put in a good enough prompt to get a high quality research proposal. And this linked with the final assessment for the module. In fact, all seminars and all sessions in the module were designed to help students do as well as possible with the final assessment. For the final assessment, I give them a 500-word prompt to write a 1,500-word research proposal on a topic of their choosing. The only part of this prompt that they modify is what they like the topic of the research proposal to be, and then they mark and critique that research proposal, putting themselves in the shoes of markers for the final assessment. They've got 1,000 words for their mark and critique, and they write a 500-word reflective statement on their experience of using GenAI, either for the assessment, writing the research proposal, or anything to do with anything they learned over the course of the module. In later weeks, we gave some attention to academic misconduct at the university, what the rules were, and also had discussions about academic integrity. So students would reflect on what they thought was the acceptable use of GenAI in their studies. And they were thinking more broadly about entering the world of employment and their future careers and how they might use GenAI later in their lives. In other seminars, we got the GenAI to design a questionnaire and code the answers to the questionnaire. Students appreciated that. They enjoyed that. And they used their prompt engineering skills to get the GenAI to write the best questionnaire possible, code it, specify what the variables were, nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. But I think one of the seminars that they appreciated the most was very focused on their lives and student enterprises. So instead of giving the GenAI a detailed prompt for what you wanted it to do, we give them a piece of text. So give the GenAI a piece of text and get it to ask questions to do something. So for instance, writing the best cover letter possible. So the students would put a job description for a job they were interested in for the summer or later in their lives, we'll say, after they graduate, and say, ask me as many questions as you need to in order to write the very best cover letter for this job that will get me an interview. And students had great success with that. Some students reported to me later that the cover letters that GenAI helped them with got them a summer job that they'd hoped for. One of them got a job as a marketing character in an enterprise in Spain. And they said that was all thanks to the GenAI's assistance with the cover letter. And they're using GenAI in that role in their marketing job in Spain, which is great.
Fabulous. I mean, oh, sorry, Ty, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, but I've got two distinct types of students in my seminars. I've got international business management students, and they love the cover letter. But I've got also business and entrepreneurship students. And while they're studying, they're also developing and growing their student enterprises. So they're thinking, oh, I'm going to be working for myself. This task is of no use to me. So for them, I got them to enter some information about their student enterprise and write some marketing materials. Ask me as many questions as you need to write the very best tweet that will get me some customers or something like that. And I'll skip over very quickly, Kevin, but we go to the final seminar here now. And for this, well, I just took the bull by the horns. Can you cheat the assessment for this module? And we had a lot of fun in this seminar. 2 parts to the final assessment, as I mentioned. The first, marking and critiquing a research proposal written by GenAI, and the second part, writing a reflective statement. So it was lots of fun putting prompt engineering skills to the test to try and get GenAI to mark and critique a GenAI research proposal, which was great. Students said total lack of meaningful engagement with methodological texts. They also said that GenAI was giving itself far too high a mark for quite a weak research proposal. As for the reflective statements, totally lacking in authenticity, no real meaningful examples or descriptions that the student would reflect on, and no proposed ways of using GenAI in their studies and future careers that really seemed credible. It was all vague and ambiguous, and students said it's very unlikely that it would earn a pass.
I mean, there was so much to that answer that was really fascinating to me. I think anybody listening to this, I mean, there was so many different ideas there, that people could take away and use in terms of encouraging use of generative AI in the classroom, but as a tool that supports learning. I mean, one thing that really resonated with me there, Tig, was the whole, let's all be honest about how we're using and how we've used generative AI in the past. Have people tried to cheat with it, etc. And I think we need those conversations with students, don't we? Because we're not going to actually utilize this as a tool in the most effective way if we don't really understand how students are using it, but also by providing that bit of support in terms of writing good prompts, etc. So, I mean, absolutely fabulous and fascinating answer. One thing I should say, actually, Ty, before I ask the next question, because it relates to your YouTube channel. So, anyone listening, Ty's got a YouTube channel. Please do visit it. It's got some fabulous information on there. And I'll put some further links to the channel in the description to this particular podcast so it can take people straight there. But in one of your YouTube videos, you mentioned 2 distinct strategies that students employed when using GenAI. So creating a vague proposal to critique harshly and crafting a detailed proposal for potential future use. I mean, what insights did you gain about student learning and engagement from those 2 different approaches?
Thank you so much. And I should say that if anybody's interested in any of the materials or resources that I mentioned during this conversation, the assessment brief, or any of my seminar slides, please get in touch. I've shared with lots of educators across the UK already, and I'm very happy to share with you too. Please get in touch. Okay, the 2 strategies. So for the final assessment, marking and critiquing a research proposal. So first, you get GenAI to write a research proposal. I give the students a 500-word prompt. The only part of the prompt that they modify is a little bit in squared brackets I have right at the start. Just says, enter whatever you like here, enter your proposal topic. And almost at the beginning of the module, students were getting very engaged with it, which I love to see, because the previous year that just didn't happen. However, this year students were saying, well, we could replace the text in the prompt with the topic, the impact of TikTok on student study habits. And yeah, you'd get a research proposal, but it would be vague and it wouldn't relate to what students were doing for their dissertation or research project at Northumbria University. So students were getting more and more detailed with what they entered in my squared brackets part of the prompt in the final assessment. So students would say, I want a research proposal. The topic should be the impact of TikTok on student study habits at Northumbria University. The study focuses on students studying business and entrepreneurship or international business management. And it should be an interpretivist, inductive, qualitative study involving 20 interviews with students studying this program. The interviews should be no more than 20 minutes in duration and will be recorded on a phone. For ethical considerations, you should refer to an informed consent document and consent form that will be signed by participants. Ethical approval is obtained through the research supervisor, so they're tailoring exactly what they want in the research proposal in their prompt. It does take a lot of work, but the output that the GenAI created would be far more useful to them in the future. So providing that extra detail and that extra instruction to the GenAI makes its output far more valuable to them. That was one strategy. Other students just replaced the topic of the proposal with social media and just let the GenAI go crazy. It could put in whatever it wanted. Students noted that the GenAI created research proposals that were totally inappropriate for undergraduate students. Some mentioned projects that had a budget of hundreds of thousands of pounds, and I should say hundreds of thousands of dollars, and involved a research team, so they became less relevant and less feasible or realistic for, specifically, an undergraduate student at Northumbria University. And that was the idea of the research proposal in the assignment, that the students would put themselves in the shoes of markers and pretend that they were marking a research proposal by a student at Northumbria University. So GenAI loves to mention getting ethical approval from the ethics committee, something like that. So if the students were aiming to harshly mark an inappropriate research proposal, they'd say the GenAI is suggesting things that are totally irrelevant to undergraduate dissertation module at Northumbria University, and include a citation to the instructions for undergraduate students.
So, I mean, it sounds a lot like by sort of showing students in real time in class the limitations of generative AI, how it's not just going to provide the perfect essay, report, research proposal. It's not going to give you all the answers. That can really help mitigate against cases of academic misconduct using generative AI, because students know that actually there are quite a lot of limitations to it. I've done a bit of experimentation myself, the same as we all have with things like ChatGPT, and I actually prefer the way I write myself rather than the way that the tool would provide a piece of writing that I've asked it to provide, even with a fairly detailed prompt. So it's certainly not bulletproof. But again, I think anybody listening to this, there's another great idea for them to potentially steal their tag. So I hope you're happy to share those things. I mean, what were some of the key challenges or limitations that students encountered when using generative AI tools to write and critique those research proposals? I mean, how did those challenges affect their overall learning experience, do you think?
Yes, interesting question. I will say, before I talk about the challenges and students' experience of the module, was that the students adapted to it very quickly. So they're thinking, I could use ChatGPT to write the research proposal for the final assessment, and then use Claude to mark it, or the other way around. So using the GenAI tools in very interesting ways and pairing them up with each other was great. The question related to the student experience of the module and student challenges, I think a lot of students realized that they couldn't use GenAI uncritically. In fact, some said to me that in the past, they had presumed that the GenAI was an all-knowing bot because it seems like it's smart the way it rattles off so much text at speed. And they never really critically engaged with that. So when students were carefully analyzing the GenAI output, a lot of them said, there's a lot of waffle in here. Because GenAI starts out, does a sort of waffly version of whatever instructions that you give it, and then ends in a conclusion, trying to work in the words delve, dive, embark, and a few other keywords in there. But a lot of the writing is very substanceless. When students were talking about trying to cheat the final assessment or get some help with it, a lot of them mentioned that the writing seemed really inauthentic. So no matter how much time they gave to writing very detailed and comprehensive prompts, a lot of them said, I think my time would be spent better just writing the thing myself, which was great to see. I was hoping that students would come to that conclusion themselves. I don't want to be prescriptive in, and by the end of this module, you'll understand that Gen AI does have some value, but you can't outsource your thinking to a Gen AI. A lot of students have said to me that they can use Gen AI to do the doing, but it can't replace their thinking. And a lot of them mentioned in post-module interviews that we did how they felt that their critical thinking had come along. So evaluating Gen AI output very critically. So yeah, there's a lot of repetition in here. A lot of this is very vague. A lot of this doesn't seem very authentic. It doesn't seem like it was written by me. A lot of students said there were a lot of false claims in there. As a research methods module, there wasn't too much bias in there. I was hoping students would spot that, but nobody picked a subject that was really controversial to look at for their research proposal. But they did, I would say, use Gen AI to its limits. They understand where its limits are, and they understand the things that it can't do.
I mean, I think that's absolutely critical, isn't it? Because I think what it sounds like is that you are really encouraging students to employ sort of higher order cognitive skills, that critical thinking, alongside the generative AI. It's become that sort of cognitive prothesis that we sometimes read about in the literature, or that form of intelligence augmentation. I think Chris Didi at Harvard coined that particular phrase, and I quite like it because it kind of provides a driver for us to think about generative AI, not just as this all-knowing provider of answers. It's actually something that can, really prompt and drive further critical thinking if it's used in the right way. And I mean, it sounds certainly like that was happening. Just sort of thinking about that process a little bit more deeply, then you mentioned previously that you got the students writing some reflective statements. In the reflective statements, students obviously had to consider the benefits and shortcomings of using generative AI for complex tasks. What were some of the most insightful reflections that you came across from the students, and how do they align with your own views on the role of AI in education?
Yes, Gen AI is a tool. And I think by the end of the module, all students viewed Gen AI in that way. They said this is not some all-knowing super intelligence that can answer any question. They were saying this is a tool. It's part of my toolkit. In terms of the benefits that student mentioned in their reflective statements, some of these reflective statements were absolutely brilliant. They were so good. So students with dyslexia saying how it helped them overcome some of the challenges that they faced in their academic writing. Some students writing about using the Gen AI to bounce ideas off. So for the final assessment, I want to talk about Gen AI not fully adhering to my instructions. Even though I've given it detailed instructions, it's not doing exactly what I ask it to. How could I reflect on this? What might I be able to do in the future? And using the Gen AI output to inform their reflections. Or if they're using more advanced tools like Perplexity or Claude, or the newer versions of ChatGPT, it might refer them to a source that they could read as well and say, well, my reflection agreed with this author or this article on the web that specifies this same limitation of Gen AI. A lot of students spoke about it improving their productivity or the quality of their writing or the quality of their ideas, giving them an opportunity to refine them. In terms of the disadvantages, it's weak, vague, biased, waffle that's just no good for any module and wouldn't achieve a pass or definitely not a high mark. And what's the point of that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the point you made there about learners with dyslexia, I mean, that's something that's very close to my heart because I'm a big advocate and practitioner of universal design. So, many conversations I've had with people where we've talked about the use of generative AI as a tool, I've sort of said, look, this is a piece of assistive software potentially for all learners, but particularly for learners that face different types of challenges. So it's great to see and hear that you've had that experience in your own classroom. Final question then, Tadhg. Given the outcomes of your obviously very innovative assessment methods, how do you foresee the integration of generative AI in higher education evolving? I mean, what potential changes or adaptations do you think will be necessary to effectively incorporate AI tools into the curriculum in the future?
Interesting question. Number one, turn off AI detectors. If a student can write a plausible piece of work that fulfills the learning objectives for a module, and you can't tell if the student wrote it or if GenAI did it or assisted with it, who cares? So that's what I would say, first of all. Don't get hung up on the AI scores or anything like that in terms of assessments. Focus on the quality of the work. In the future, I see Gen AI being used a lot more. In terms of the Turnitin statistics at Northumbria University, I've seen some students are using Gen AI, or I should say most students are using Gen AI at least for 20-ish% of their work, and that might be Grammarly or Quillbot or other tools refining their grammar or things like that. But in the future, I think it'll be more like, here is a Gen AI output that I've modified for the assessment, and you can see where the student has tweaked it. So for instance, here the Gen AI cites a study, but they haven't really got the findings of that study correct. They should have said this instead about it. The submission could have been improved by some comparison or contrast with another study. The Gen AI left out a recent or seminal study that it should have included here, something like that. So switching the focus of assessments from just writing tasks to ones that involve critical thinking and deeper reflection on what the potential is of tools like Gen AI in assignments, and seeing how students could improve on them rather than spending their time just writing 2,000, 3,000 word essay.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I've done some work myself where I've used generative AI in the formative assessment process, where we've given the learners a prompt and say chat GPT or whatever's provided an output, and I've gone, right, you critique that output very much in the way that you've done and say, how could you make this better? It's certainly not going to be perfect. What things are missing? How could it be improved? Where are the flaws in the argument that it's creating? Where are the missing and gaps in the information that it provides? And it's almost kind of making the process of assessment just as important as the product. And I think that kind of needs to be the case, because you should learn something, shouldn't you, from being assessed, and it should be an integrated part of that journey. And I mean, it certainly sounds like the work that you've done on that research methods module, Tadhg, it is an inherent part of the process. So I mean, that's been an absolute fabulous discussion. The time's absolutely flown by. I mean, I was really listening intently to that, and I think anybody listening to this podcast will have an absolute raft of ideas that they can take away and try for themselves. So please do stay in touch with us, Tadhg, about how you continue to develop your AI approaches. As I mentioned, you do have a YouTube channel, don't you? And we'll provide obviously all the links and everything else to that. But it would be good at some point in future to get you back on the Talking, Learning and Teaching podcast.
Fantastic. I look forward to it. Next year, this module is coming back even bigger and even better. Going to be using tools like Elicit in class. So more sophisticated research tools than just chatbots. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what students think of that and these new tools as part of their toolkit for their studies.
Well, we really look forward to hearing about that, Tadhg. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.